This could have been a full-on hypothermia situation. I was deep in the Mojave Desert, solo backpacking, zero rain in the forecast, and somehow I was about to spend the night in soaking wet gear with freezing temps incoming.
That's bad. That is bad.
I made one dumb mistake that could have completely wrecked my trip, and I still can't believe I did this. All right, let's rewind. 3 nights in Joshua Tree, one of the driest, most beautiful places you can imagine. And like a responsible backpacker, I checked the weather forecast before I left. Actually, I checked it twice. First at home and again using my Garmin InReach satellite device just a few hours before this happened. 0% chance of rain. So I figured, cool, I'll set up my tent, leave half of my rain fly off, and still get to sleep under the stars. Best of both worlds, right? If I start hearing drops in the middle of the night, I'll just jump out and pull the rest of my rain fly over. Simple, no big deal. So the sun was setting and I still needed to go grab my water cache because in Joshua Tree there are no natural water sources in the park, and collecting water is actually illegal. The few available water sources are protected for wildlife. So if you want water, you have to plan ahead and cache it along remote desert roads before your trip. So I head out on a quick 2-mile round trip hike to get my water supply. And because I was just going to grab my water and come right back, I made another mistake. I left my rain jacket at camp because, duh, it's the desert, it's not supposed to rain, and that's when Mother Nature decided to humble me.
Well, I just picked up my water and I got about a mile back to camp and it just started dumping rain. Wow, there was no rain in the forecast. I even checked it this morning, 0% chance of rain, and it is dumping right now. And of course, I left my clothes bag, including my rain jacket, back at camp. So I have no rain jacket. I have no idea how long this is gonna last. I got a good 20-30 minute walk back to camp.
Now, if you've never been caught in a freak desert rainstorm, let me tell you, it's aggressive. When it rains in the desert, it dumps. So at this point, my first priority is getting back to camp ASAP. So I start power walking, then jogging, and if it wasn't for the cactus, the rocks, and the fact that it was pitch black outside, I probably would have full-on sprinted.
So this is turning into a little bit of a situation now. The rain has not stopped. I'm getting pretty soaking wet, and it just occurred to me that because half of my tent is exposed without the rain fly covering it, I threw my down quilt into the tent before I left, which means it's sitting in the tent and the back half of my tent is getting soaking wet.
And that's when I realized my tent is half exposed to the rain and my quilt is inside. I have no idea if I left it under the covered side of the tent or not.
We are dipping down in temperatures towards freezing again tonight, which means this could put me in a little bit of a situation where if my down quilt is soaking wet and the layers I'm currently wearing right now are soaking wet, and we're getting down into freezing temps, yeah, I could have some choices to make tonight. All right, let's see what we got here. Half the tent exposed, and oh gosh, that's not what you want to see. Oh man, the entire quilt was exposed and is soaking wet from what I can see. That's bad. That is bad.
Yeah, the tent floor soaked. The quilt absolutely drenched. I tossed it on the wrong side of the tent before I left. And just to make things even better, the temperature is dropping fast.
All right, so situation report, it's not good. It's not good. My down quilt is completely soaked, both the inside and the outside. And I can only assume the down feathers inside the quilt are soaked as well.
At this point, I basically have 3 options. 1, bail and hike all the way back to the car. The problem, it's over 3 hours away and I'd have to hike out cold, wet, and in the dark. Not exactly ideal. 2, try to sleep in my wet quilt and risk freezing, but I'd rather not become a hypothermia case study. And 3, go full backpacker survival mode and try to make this work. I went with option 3. First step, sponge patrol.
I just spent about 45 minutes taking a microfiber towel and wiping down in one corner of my tent a full inch of standing water in the bottom of the tent. Soaked that all up. That took about 50 times of soaking the microfiber towel and wringing it out before I got that dry. At the moment I've got my quilt suspended in the air in my tent. just hanging.
Once I got everything as dry as I could, the next step was to layer up. The good news is my down jacket was with me when it started raining, so I immediately tossed it into my pack, and that luckily stayed dry. That was my lifeline. I put it on immediately along with every single dry layer that I had left. Then I had to get warm. Fast.
I just pulled a weather report and it's supposed to get down to 33, 34 degrees Fahrenheit. So just a hair above freezing. So basically I got a soaking wet down quilt, trying to spend the night in near freezing temperatures, and I'm gonna do it. Basically the plan is I'm gonna eat a bunch of food.
I probably ate about 1,000 calories because calories equal warmth.
I'm gonna do about 100 jumping jacks outside the tent and just warm myself up as much as possible. And then I'm gonna jump into the quilt, zip everything up, and just spend the next few hours in there hoping that my body heat will dry out some of the moistness and the wetness in the quilt. And then we'll just have to see if that's enough for me to survive the full night in a soaking wet quilt.
And at this point, I'm just lying there thinking this is either genius or I'm about to have a very long, very cold night.
Well, guys, I got some bad news. I've been in the tent now for a couple hours in the wet down quilt, trying to stay warm. The temperature's been dropping a bit, and you know what? I gotta take some layers off because I'm freaking hot. I'm actually doing just fine.
And somehow it worked. After about a couple hours, even though the temperatures were dropping, I started feeling warm in my quilt. It turns out my body heat did indeed dry out just enough of the quilt to start trapping some warmth. It was still damp, kind of gross, and smelled like wet socks, but it was warm. I was dry enough, and I was gonna make it through the night. By morning, the rain had stopped. The desert was fresh and beautiful like nothing had ever happened. Meanwhile, I was thanking my lucky stars. My quilt was still damp from the night before, but I was able to lay it out in the sun for a few hours and let it completely dry. And that was it. I survived my dumbest backpacking mistake. So yeah, not my proudest moment, but here's what you can take away from this. If you're gonna go without the rainfly or put your rainfly on halfway, at least make sure your most important gear is under the covered side, or, you know, just put the whole thing on and avoid the situation entirely. Also, never leave camp without your rain jacket. Ever. Even a 10-minute trip can turn into a soaked disaster real fast. The good news, I learned my lesson. The bad news, this probably won't be my last dumb backpacking mistake. But now I gotta know, what's the dumbest backpacking mistake you've ever made? Drop it in the comments so we can all learn and laugh together. All right, stay dry, don't trust the weather, and I'll see you on the next adventure.